Hey everybody, welcome to Tech Tickle. Oh god, I keep promising you build vlog number 6, but I actually have to kind of redo number 6 because the system I had planned to feature, it's kind of sold today, so we're gonna have to put that one off and do another one. I've got it sitting right there. Anyway, so today instead what I thought I would do is talk about mini ITX systems. I am a big fan of small form factor builds. My personal rig right here actually has a Fantech Enthoo Evolve ITX, and over here I've got an SG13 under my TV, so I'm very well versed in these cases and I've owned lots of them. So I figured it would be a good idea to sit here and talk about whether or not an ITX system is something that you can feasibly, viably put together using secondhand components. So stay tuned. Okay, so first off, cases are always readily available. Buyer's remorse for ITX builders is a very real thing. A lot of people get into the small form factor goodness and then they're like, yeah, you know what? Lacking expansion options, don't like the fact that I only have 2 DIMM slots. I would rather go back to micro ATX or something like that. And in most cases, a micro ATX system, unless you're going for like super small form factor, isn't really going to cost you much more space. So they end up selling their used shit on Kijiji or Craigslist, looking to recover some funds. Now, the cases are always cheap because cases are kind of a harder sell. They're always a little bit dirty, they're a little bit dusty. And the reality is the majority of ITX cases are relatively cheap. They're usually like sub $100 here in Canada. Some of them are like among the cheapest cases you can buy, like the Thermaltate Core V1 or the aforementioned SG13, which I happen to own. They're all like $50 cases. So realistically, why would you want to buy one used if you can just go get a brand new one that's fresh and smells nice and has all the accessories and it costs you very little money? I have purchased a lot of them used. Just going over my list here, I've had in my possession the SG05 from Silverstone, Thermaltate Core V1, which I just sold today, Corsair 250D, Bitphoenix Prodigy, Fractal Design Core 500, which I almost kept for my big rig here, but I decided to go a little bit larger. I didn't like the airflow. RVZ02, I've had one of those. I've had a Node 304. I've had a Cooler Master Elite 130 and 110. I've also owned I think that's it actually. So I've owned a lot of ITX cases. I've worked in a lot of them, had a lot of experience, and I've acquired them all for very cheap because they are a very niche product and a lot of people have difficulty offloading them once they've decided to transition away from small form factor. So while cases might be cheap, motherboards are not. And this relates to the retail pricing of ITX motherboards. So ITX boards actually pose quite an engineering challenge for the manufacturers. Trying to get a fully featured board into such a small form factor eliminates any advantage they might gain in saving on material costs. So micro ATX boards, which are not particularly complicated to engineer, it's not applied to ITX boards. So you actually see prices at retail go up when you transition down in size to ITX. This translates into the secondary market. So when people look to resell their boards, they're often basing their sale price off of retail and they're in no rush to sell. Why are they in no rush to sell? Well, a case that's ITX based can only house ITX motherboards, but an ITX motherboard can fit in any case. So worst case scenario, they can just reuse it in a micro ATX case or even a full-size case, as ridiculous as that may look, and therefore they're not necessarily in a rush to get rid of it. The likelihood of you finding an ITX board that is inexpensive is a lot less likely than finding a case that's inexpensive. In the same vein, we have small form factor power supplies, which once again come with engineering challenges, cost more at retail, and that translates to the secondary market. Couple that with the fact that most ITX cases don't even require a small form factor power supply, and you'll find that the majority of small form factor builders, whether they are remorseful or not, will not even own one. So the scarcity of the power supplies of this form factor on the secondary market is very real. The odds of you finding a cheap one are low. In my lifetime, I have found a grand total of one for sale, secondhand, and it was a $40, 450 watt Silverstone power supply, one of the earliest revisions of the thing that they did. The fan sucks on it, it's noisy as fuck. I actually had to RMA it because it was going at full speed all the time. Considering you don't really need one anyway, it's kind of a footnote, but I thought I'd mention it. Onward to ITX graphics cards. These are a bit of an oddity because, first of all, most cases that are small form factor, or at least claim to be, don't actually need short graphics cards. The majority of them, including cases like the Dan A4 and the N case, can all fit full-size graphics cards, so there's no real need to get a small one. And in the few cases, like with the Osmi and some Lian Li cases, where a small form factor card is required, they're actually pretty readily available. GTX 970 minis are everywhere, largely again due to buyer's remorse, and the reason why the same engineering challenges don't raise the cost of ITX cards is because since the 600 series, manufacturers have been looking to produce smaller graphics cards to save money. The only reason why they haven't is because market research has shown the average user likes a big card. It's ridiculous. It's so stupid. And if you were around for the 600 series, you might remember the E-peen extenders that were on the ends of a lot of these cards to make them look bigger, despite the fact that the PCB itself was ITX sized. So bottom line is, it does not cost more money to make an ITX sized card, therefore they're relatively the same price, and because they're smaller and actually run a bit hotter and don't perform as well and don't have quite the same factory overclocks, they're actually usually a little bit less than their counterparts on Kijiji and Craigslist, so you might actually be able to save a bit of money there. Moving on to RAM. Are there RAM requirements? Usually not. It all depends on the CPU cooler you're going to pair it with, and I'll talk about that later, but low profile RAM is typically readily available in the form of value RAM that has no heat spreader, as long as you're comfortable with rock bottom performance. If you want something a little better, you might have a tough time finding it. Luckily, Crucial Ballistics and their low profile RAM is the most popular of the sort, and they're usually available. At least a few kits every month pop up here in Toronto, so I would not be surprised if you had no problems finding one yourself in your given city. As for storage, there's really not much to talk about here. If you want an M2 drive, they are still relatively new and you might have difficulty finding one secondhand, and again, you will pay a premium due to the early adopter tax and engineering challenges. Once again, they're more expensive at retail. 2.5-inch SSDs are everywhere, and almost every case will accommodate several of them. If you really need mechanical storage, there are a couple of options. First, you can get a case that supports 3.5-inch drives, of which there are many, some of which I've already mentioned in this video. But if you don't want to go with a 3.5-inch drive because it's just too big and too clunky and take up too much space, laptop hard drives, and I have shown you this in my very first video, make a great companion for a main boot drive SSD. Get yourself a 640, 750, or even 1 terabyte laptop hard drive, put it in alongside your SSD, and you're good to go. And those should be pretty cheap. I've gotten those for as little as like $5 or $10 a piece because everybody and their sister is tearing open their laptop, yanking out their hard drive, and putting in a primary SSD. So they're fucking everywhere. Last but not least, we have the most difficult challenge that all ITX builders will experience when they're putting together their first small form factor build, and that is the CPU cooler. CPU coolers are undoubtedly the most difficult part of putting together an ITX build, because you have very little space to work with. Every board is uniquely different, and there are all sorts of clearance issues that could crop up. Long story short, air coolers are always going to be a challenge, so this is one instance where I might recommend just going with an AIO at 120 millimeters and mounting it on one of the very few fan mounts that are going to be in these small cases. Of course, the larger the case, if you go with something that's like a Maxi ITX case that's actually built to be sort of fully featured and is actually quite large, you won't have a problem. But if you're going with something like the SG13, it's a whole different story. And speaking of, one other point I want to make is that small form factor cases, truly small form factor cases, the ones that are genuinely tiny and cut a lot of corners to try and stay small, have air balance issues. So what you have to understand is that the rules change for ITX builds. It's totally different from what you would get in a full-size case or even a mini ITX case that is sort of meant to be fuller sized, like the Fantex case I have sitting here. So this one here has a lot of air volume inside of it. And if you have any experience with building operations, you're going to understand how important air balance is in a small room. You may think to yourself, well, one intake fan should be fine, that'll push the hot air out and you'll have no problems. But that's not actually how it works. When an intake fan is blowing cool air into a small case, what ends up happening is called air mixing. And it's the same sort of thing you get in a house or in a building that has dual duct air handling. So you have one supplying hot air and one supplying cold air, and the two mix in what's called a mixing box, and that dictates room temperature when it's delivered to the room. Similarly, in a case like that, you're going to have intake air blowing cool air inside. It's going to actually mix with the hot air, come to a temperature in between, and just sit there until it passively exhausts. And the force from the fan, believe it or not, is not quite enough to force the air out quick enough to keep the temperature internally in line with ambient temperatures. This is precisely why makers of the end case, the people at Silverstone, the people at Lian Li, they all say that you should use blower graphics cards in your small form factor cases, because what they do is they take air from inside the case, they ball it up through that impeller, and they shoot it at the back. There are some makers who say, no, it's fine, use one of those open air dissipation coolers, you know, with the 2 fans and the open fins and whatever else, because they think that their case has enough passive ventilation to handle the heat. But I have owned an RVZ02 and an O202 and other cases very similar that have very, very little airspace in that graphics card chamber, and I can tell you from experience that temperatures will be noticeably higher. Cards will thermal throttle unless you make adjustments accordingly. Take some fucking grade 9 physics, learn your ass some science, and educate yourself before you fucking try to argue. So long story short, is it wise to build a secondhand ITX system? I don't think so. You can certainly do it, and you will save yourself 20 to 30% over retail, but you're still going to end up paying a premium that makes the whole process a little bit disheartening. Full-size systems are still the way to go, hands down. Parts are everywhere. They're going to be way cheaper. You're going to get much better bang for buck. I think we're going to call that one a video. I hope you enjoyed yourself. Hope you learned something. I promise a build log is coming. I just go through computers way too fucking fast sometimes to film them and benchmark them. And I got people waving money in my face. It's like, I want to buy them. You're so much cheaper than everyone else in the city. And your service is great. And you back up your shit. And you have a YouTube channel, so I know I can trust you. So I want to buy from you. And I have to sell them things. I'm certainly not going to turn their money away. Well, that would be stupid. So, but this one, I have one coming up. You can kind of see it in the view. I think right there, right on the edge of the screen, you can see the red case I put it in. It's going to be super sexy. And that's coming up next. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.